Sure can.
Awesome.
There we go. All right, can you see that screen okay?
Yes.
Very good. Well, first of all, thank you for providing me the opportunity to visit with you all again. I didn't know how the last one went, so I'm pleased that you invited me back for something else. We're going to spend some time talking about birds this time. I know you spend a lot of time talking about Houston toads, which is awesome. We're going to shift our attention today to our feathered friends, if you will. So, and where you are in Bastrop County, in that area, is a really good spot this time of the year to be seeing a lot of birds. And we're going to focus mostly on warblers today, but I'm also going to add in some other spring migrants, and mostly we're going to talk about colorful ones so that you don't just see pictures of a bunch of brown birds that everybody finds challenging to identify. One bird I don't have in my presentation is the dude behind me. That's the loggerhead shrike. That's a bird that we're doing some important research on in the Round Rock area. And I know the Round Rock has recently had that tornado up there. And so we're still assessing what happened to the loggerhead shrikes. But of course, more importantly, hopefully everybody up there is doing okay. All right, so we're going to talk about warblers. First, I should tell you who I am, just because, well, that's kind of what I'm obligated to do. I do work for Texas Parks and Wildlife. I've been working for Texas Parks and Wildlife now about 11 years, I guess. Started out with Guadalupe River State Park as a park interpreter, and now I'm serving as one of two Texas Nature Trackers biologists within the Wildlife Diversity Program. We have a team of 4 people that I actually work with, and we call ourselves a community stewardship and engagement team. And that's basically what we try to do. We try to engage people all around the state of Texas to get out and become involved in the natural world, and with the idea of being able to not only become involved in the natural world, but also help us by documenting the flora and fauna of the state of Texas. So what we do is we use the tool of iNaturalist. Hopefully everybody in the audience has heard of that, or even has it downloaded and is an iNaturalist user at this point. If not, you should be. If you're just learning about nature, or you've been learning about nature for a long time, it's a fantastic app. It's free. It allows you to actually take your camera, take your phone, point it at something, plant or animal, and it helps you to identify what it is, whether it's in your backyard or whether it's in a national park. And it doesn't matter if it's here in Texas or around the entire earth. It's a pretty powerful tool. It's kind of like walking around with a nature encyclopedia in your phone. So we have a series of projects that we have started where we take information from iNaturalist and use that to learn more about the flora and fauna of the state of Texas. And again, by having the general public, community scientists out there using iNaturalist, we can gather a lot of data that our regular biologists simply don't have the bandwidth or the time or the ability to track, especially as your new biologist was talking about, still looking for dead deer to take samples from for CWD. So we don't focus on every species in Texas, because there's a lot of them, and a lot of them are doing fine. What we're trying to actually focus on are what are known as species of greatest conservation need. The information we can gather from those species that are out there, including the Houston toad is a perfect example, ends up hopefully with the Texas Natural Diversity Database, which is kind of storehouse of information on where those SGCN species are located. And so what is an SGCN? Just real quickly, you may have heard this spiel before from me the first time I visited with you in person, but a species of greatest conservation need is a native plant or animal that is declining or rare and in need of attention to recover or to prevent the need to list under state or federal regulation. Now, some of them are already on those lists, and we're trying to do practice good conservation, including the Houston toad. But a lot of them are in the process of declining. And the idea is that if we can identify them as species of concern that have some need, not only for conservation practice that will help them, but also with some of them, it's just a matter of finding out what is their population status, how are they actually doing? And again, that takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of work. So this is a list of species that is dynamic, is reviewed every year. Some of our SGCNs are what you see there. The Houston toad's dead center in that image of critters. And of course, the Texas horned lizard is right there. The whooping crane, prothonotary warbler, which is a bird that nests in your neck of the woods in small numbers, is also there. The loggerhead shrike, the bird I mentioned at the beginning over my head there, is also an SGCN. And of course, the American bumblebee. And there are a whole host of them, just over 1,300 species across the board are species that we're focused on. And again, just to real quickly, iNaturalist is an online social network of people sharing natural history information. When it was created by some graduate students out in California, they were just trying to connect people to nature, and then also in the process, be able to collect data that could actually be used by conservation agencies like Texas Parks and Wildlife. And it was begun back in several years ago. This was as of March 15th, so about a week and a half ago. There have already been globally over 91 million observations. In Texas alone, there are approaching 6 million observations. And I guess, again, a lot of those might be white-tailed deer or very common other wildlife or plant species. That's okay. There's also among that nearly 6 million observations, there are images and records of species that of greatest conservation need, and those are the ones we focus on. So with a tool that is that significant, that important, collecting that much data, back in 2013, our program partnered with iNaturalist, and that's when we set up our projects. We went from those paper forms into this online form, and now we're collecting, as I mentioned, much data. The basic way it works is you download the app on the phone, you create an account, you go out, you point your camera at something, take a picture of it, upload it to iNaturalist. If it doesn't help you ID it at that spot, people that use iNaturalist will actually help you ID them, and then you can learn more about what's around you and potentially be contributing important data. Texas Nature Trackers also does some other things. We do have a social media presence. We have an Instagram page that my colleague Tanya Homayun takes care of, and posts all kinds of cool, interesting things and reels and all kinds of other stuff that I don't really understand. I, however, take care of the Facebook page. And that includes doing Facebook Live events where we'll just go out and do a virtual nature walks. In fact, we'll have one coming up, I believe, next Saturday, where you can actually go onto Facebook, find Texas Nature Trackers, follow us, and you can join us on those virtual walks where we go out and listen to birds, look at the wildflowers, the plants, whatever it is we encounter out there. We have a lot of fun. We have a pretty good number of followers that still join us, even as the pandemic has lessened, I guess you could say. So let's talk wood warblers. So I don't know how many of you are bird watchers out there, or birders, whatever term you want to use. I always called my mom a bird watcher because she would watch the robins out the window, but she was not somebody that had a pair of binoculars and went traipsing all over the place like birders do. So those definitions are obviously subject to interpretation. But wood warblers are an entire group of birds that a lot of people love to focus on, especially in the spring migration, because they historically have been very common, they're very colorful, and there's lots of different kinds. In fact, there are more than 50 species in the United States and Canada. Like I say, very colorful. They're small, which makes them challenging to find in the woods because a lot of them are only the size of the leaves upon which they are feeding, looking for insects and spiders and eggs and things like that of arthropods. They are very thin-billed by comparison to something like a cardinal. Most of them are at least partially migratory. Many of them are what we refer to as neotropic migrants, in that they come here from maybe Mexico, Central America, South America. They will breed and then they leave and go back. They actually spend more time, most of them spend more time in what we would call their wintering grounds than they do in their breeding grounds. So they take advantage of the fact that at this time of the year and then through the summer months in the United States and Canada, there is a large flush of insects and other arthropod prey that they can then have enough of that available with less competition from all the other birds that are in the tropics, they can take advantage of that, raise their young, and then get on out of here before fall hits and get back to where they spend most of their year. So there's a lot of identification challenges with warblers, just there are with sparrows and other groups of birds. Some of them are the fact that they are only around, most of them are only around for a very short period of the year. So they may be, if they're a migrant, they may be here for, you may see 1 or 2 or 4 for the entire spring as they migrate through the area. And generally their migration consists of, they migrate at night when the air is calmer, it's cooler, they can't feed at night, so that's a good time for them to move. So they'll be up in the air at night, and then in the morning they will land, they will feed, they will fatten up, store fat, and then a day or maybe a few days later, they'll take off and continue their migration north. And they just come in wave after wave after wave for several weeks. And then they're gone. A lot of them are gone. They're up in Canada breeding. They're up in the northern United States, in the Northeast, wherever that happens to be, where their breeding ranges are. So that's one of the challenges, that when you only have a chance to see that bird for 3 or 4 weeks, or even a couple of weeks, trying to remember it from one spring to the next spring can be real challenging. And of course, they have multiple plumages. So you've got young birds, you've got older birds, you've got males versus females. The focus that we're going to take today, this afternoon, is to focus on the male birds. The females are usually a muted version of the males. They'll still be somewhat colorful, most of them, but not quite as dramatic. So that's why we'll focus on the males today.
Hey, Craig,
yes.
This is Roxanne. Can I ask a question?
Sure, absolutely.
You mentioned that their flying is done at night.
Correct.
Can you talk about artificial light and the dark skies, and if that has any impact on them?
Yeah, it certainly does. So one of the things, there's a lot of programs around now, a lot of emphasis on dark skies, because so many of our songbirds, migratory songbirds, migrate at night. One of the things that happens is oftentimes they will crash into, if you have tall buildings, they get distracted, they get confused, not trying to figure out where they're going. We have a lot of those birds hit the big tall buildings, and a lot of those big city buildings will leave their lights on. Even 1-story houses, when you have those windows where you've got lights on at night, they can have an impact. By turning off the lights, it doesn't confuse them. They will continue to migrate up and overhead. So there's a lot of potentially millions upon millions of songbirds that are being killed every year by these lit up large buildings and mostly in our big cities. But again, that can happen. I work out of a 1-story building. I've had warblers hit the glass on the side of my building and die as well. So the push is this time of the year, all the way through the spring migration, is they're encouraging people to turn out their lights at night and let the birds migrate overhead. And not be confused by what's going on down below, down close to the ground. So very, very valuable, very important program. Hey, and Roxanne, did y'all become a Texas Bird City this go around? Do you know?
Well, I know Bastrop was last year. I don't know how long it lasts and whether they are again this year. Maybe someone else knows.
Yeah. It's a several year thing. And that's one of the things that an area that gets nominated and gets selected as a Bird City, Texas community. They can work on the Lights Out program to try to help with bird migration. So that's a big deal. I was on the review committee for 2 years, and it's not easy to get selected for that. There has to be a lot of effort going on in support of bird conservation in those communities. So congratulations to Bastrop for being able to pull that off. I know it usually takes at least a couple of tries for most cities to be able to get into that program. Hopefully, Roxanne, that helps talk about that a little bit.
Yes, thank you very much.
Sure. And again, these birds, another challenge to identification is they're high up in the trees, oftentimes, not all, and not always, but a lot of times they're high up in the trees. and they are about the size of the leaves of many of those trees. So you could be out birding with a friend or a group of people, and one person might see the bird and the rest of you can't because of the angle at what you're standing versus the person that's looking at the bird. And of course, as soon as you find it, it moves again. They are constantly moving as they are searching for those small insects up there. They all have distinctive songs like all birds do. However, because so many of them are migratory through Texas, we don't hear a lot of singing. So learning their songs of all of them isn't quite as important here as it is farther to the north where they're actually breeding. Now, several of them that do breed here obviously have very distinctive songs. And if we get a chance, we might play a few of those just so you can see if you've heard them before on your property. So, but song isn't quite as important with the warblers as they move through Texas. Again, very temporary and very partial views. It can be very frustrating, especially if you're generally a new birder, trying to get your glass on that and being able to actually see enough of the bird so that you can identify what in the world it is. And of course, the other thing, because they're so high up in the tree, there's a thing called warbler neck that birders sometimes complain about because they're spending their time looking up so high all the time. When I lived up north in Minnesota and Iowa, Nebraska, and the really tall trees that they were up in there, I would literally sometimes lay down on the ground and just scope or use my binoculars from being prone because it was easier on my neck than to be standing there with my head folded all the way back. So wood warblers in Texas, there are lots of them that pass through the state of Texas. The overwintering warblers include this list of birds right here. In your area specifically, you're going to have orange-crowned, yellow rump, pine warblers. You might probably won't have black-throated grays. They're a western species that does get down into the lower Rio Grande Valley. That's what the LRGV means, along with the Wilson's warbler and the golden-crowned warbler. So, but the top three that you see right there are ones that are going to be around your area even through the winter months. And then in terms of migrants, these are a list of all of the migrants that come through the state of Texas. Some of them are very rare. A lot of them are semi-common. Because you're in the eastern third of Texas, you're going to have a chance to see more of these migrants than say here, even myself out here in Bernie, or even if you go a little farther west, it's going to be that number of birds that are possibles are going to start to drop pretty quickly. In terms of breeding birds across the state, this is the list of them. So there are a fair number that do, but several of them, of course, are very localized breeders. The golden cheek warbler, of course, is restricted to the Edwards Plateau. So that's a little bit out of your region. The orange-crowned warbler and the Virginia's warbler and the Lucy's warbler and the Grace's warbler down towards the bottom, those are all going to be on the far, far west in very localized areas. And then you have the tropical parula down in the lower Rio Grande Valley as an example. So some of those are going to be in your area. Many of them are going to be outside of your area, but we'll try to focus on those birds that do breed or potentially breed in Bastrop County. So some general notes on biology and behavior. Diet, again, I mentioned that they're primarily insectivorous, so they're eating insects. They're also eating other small arthropods like spiders. These birds eat a tremendous number of spiders. A lot of our birds that nest here actually use spider webbing when they're building their nest. They do forage in a variety of different methods, and sometimes that methodology can be used to help you identify the bird or at least pare it down as to what it is. So bark gleaning, if you see a small black and white bird running up and down and around the bark of the trees, that's going to be the black and white warbler in our area. Now, you might also have, in the wintertime, you might have nuthatches, you might have the white-breasted nuthatch show up a little bit. They're going to do the same thing, but they're a little bit different looking birds. Leaf turning, so some of the birds that are going to spend a lot of their time on the ground are going to include the ovenbird, the two water thrush species, and the Swainson's warbler, which is a bird that may breed locally in your area. So they're literally on the ground, turning over leaves, looking for worms and arthropods and snails and other things that are hiding under those leaves for food. Leaf gleaning, most of those are doing that kind of behavior where they're hunting among the leaves. They're finding all of those food items on the leaves, on the underside of the leaves, at the base of the leaves, those kind of places. And that's probably the most common behavior of finding food that these birds practice. And then you also have fly catching or sallying. And basically what that means is bird sits on a perch, insect flies by, it flies out, grabs it, comes back down, eats it. So that's what fly catching is. And of course, we also have birds that are called flycatchers, and we'll review a few of those this afternoon. Some of them are very slow and methodical. Others are very intense in their feeding. So some are they're looking around, they're observing, and then others are just constantly moving. So if you've ever seen a ruby-crowned kinglet, that is a bird that is in constant motion. It is a high intensity hunting that they do. It's probably the most extreme that you'll see, and that bird, not being a warbler, is a little bit more than most of our warblers. So sometimes you can just by the intensity of their hunting, you can help pare down what those birds might be. So some other notes on biology behavior. There's some different behaviors that they have that could help you with identification. Tail bobbing or wagging. A couple of our birds do that. These are birds that are going to be farther to the east of where you are, but they might migrate through your area. Tail fanning, the hooded warbler, which does breed in your area, and red starts, which migrate through your location in much of the state. They actually take their tail and they'll open it up like this and be flashing colors. That's called tail fanning. Some are walkers, most of them are hoppers, but some actually do walk. Those include the ovenbird and the water thrush. And again, remember, those are the birds that are on the ground. And then sometimes there's a tail bobbing, but where the entire body shakes up and down. So they're going like this as they're tail pumping and their body's rocking back and forth as they're walking along. If you're familiar with a bird called a spotted sandpiper, that's a very similar behavior. And then in terms of breeding behavior, just general breeding behavior, males usually arrive on territory before the females. The first thing they do is start singing, setting up territories, singing to discourage rival males, also singing to try to attract mates when the females do arrive. And then, of course, maintaining those territories through the breeding season. Generally, the females build their nests. They use plant fibers, they use spider webs, those kinds of materials. Incubation is done by the female. Generally, they're single brooded. What that means, they try one clutch of eggs and hopefully are successful. Now, if they have a clutch of eggs and they get predated, they may try a second clutch. But most of them, if they have a first successful clutch, that's been a pretty good season for them, and they're ready to go on and make their migration back to their wintering grounds. Their incubation rates are usually 11 to 13 days. Generally, also, when they lay one egg, they only lay one egg a day. And they do not start incubation until the entire clutch or all of the eggs are laid. And then that way the eggs all hatch within the same 24-hour period. They can feed them up as quickly as possible. And a lot of those young will fledge in 9 or so days. So they're not in the nest very long. And if you think about it, the longer they're trapped in that nest, the more susceptible they are to predation by snakes or raccoons or many other things. They are impacted significantly, some species, by brown-headed cowbirds. Brown-headed cowbird is a parasitic egg-laying bird that will hunt around. The females will hunt around and lay an egg in an unsuspecting bird's nest. That bird will then essentially incubate that egg along with its own. That egg is typically larger than the eggs of the warbler, and it also hatches faster. So it comes out bigger than the other ones and can outcompete them, can actually pitch them out of the nest. And all of a sudden you'll have this tiny little warbler feeding this great big cowbird. So unfortunately, here in the hill country, even though the cowbird is a native bird, there are efforts to reduce their numbers because they have a negative impact on the black-capped vireos and the golden-cheeked warblers, which are two birds that are significantly declined, even though the black-capped vireo has now been removed as a threatened species, which is a positive thing. So that's a little bit about their breeding behavior. So where do we begin? We can look at local breeders versus migratory species. They also have song, and we will do that. That's how kind of we're going to approach it this afternoon. They have songs. Again, songs are not as important here, with some exceptions, but they have different classifications or groupings of songs. In fact, there are tapes out there. I guess I shouldn't say tapes. Oh my God, how old am I? CDs. Where you can actually play and list, they kind of clump them together in those different sound combinations, but they're incredibly variable. Then we're going to also focus on field marks, because that's really the best way to attack trying to actually identify those warblers, is to look at things like wing bars, look at head markings, look at the back pattern on a few of them. Presence or absence of a rump patch, so a patch of feathers that's a different color from the rest of the back. Tail length is probably the hardest thing to do, to figure out how long the tail is compared to the undertail coverts, which means you'd have to be looking at the the bottom side of the bird, basically looking at their rear end, and then trying to determine that. And trust me when I say that's really pretty difficult to do. So first of all, if we just take a look at wing bars, so what that means is that those, hopefully you can see my mouse, but you see those two white lines on the, what look like white lines on the wing of this bird. Basically, those are white tips created at the tips of the greater and median coverts, and those are referred to wing bars. Most of them, if they have wing bars, will have two. Occasionally, there'll be some with just one, and then a few of them have none. So again, if they have wing bars, then you can focus on the birds that have wing bars versus the birds that don't have wing bars. And that helps with the pare down the identification. There's a close-up of those two wing bars right there. You can see the tips of those feathers are colored obviously different than the base of the feathers. And even a bird like this, a completely yellow bird like this, like the yellow warbler, will also have wing bars, but you don't really have to focus on them too much because the bird is so obviously different than most of our other warblers. But in fact, it does have a wing bar there. It has a slight wing bar right there. It's a little easier maybe to see on that one right there. So that's a bird that is pretty easy to tell without the wing bars, but again, they do have them. And then when we talk about tail spots, there are different combinations of those. The prothonotary warbler has white in the kind of the inside half of most of the outer tail feathers. You can see those pretty prominently there. The American redstart, it has that lighter color at the base of the tail feathers. And then you have the yellow rump warbler, which has the whitish color at the outer tips of the tail feathers. And then just to be different, you have the magnolia warbler, which has a band of yellow through the middle of the tail feathers. So those variations can be helpful in terms of identification as well. And then we have things called eye rings and eye arcs. So the eye ring is like what you see on the Nashville warbler, which is a complete ring around the eyeball. And that is generally white versus whatever other color is surrounding, like the gray in this case. So usually an eye ring is very, very obvious on a bird, and not all of them have them. And I should say a lot of birds appear to have some kind of eye ring, but most of them don't stand out like this bird right here. So that's what helps you separate those out. And then you can have an eye arc. So it's not a complete circle. So this McGivrae's warbler, which is more of a Western warbler here in Texas, although I've banded them here I banded them over in Comal County on one occasion. So they can be out this far east, but generally you notice it doesn't have a complete circle of color around the eye. That's why they call those eye arcs. And then head patterns, these are just a few examples. Every one of these birds has their own unique head pattern, but you can see how variable they can be. A lot of them, it's yellow or some kind of yellow somewhere on their face, with some black somewhere, so patches of black. And learning where those patches of black and yellow are contrasting on the face can help you with your identification. And just like anything else you're trying to learn, you can't go out one time and think you got them all, because you'll be frustrated by them. But the great thing is, anytime you see one of these birds, they're so amazing that it's a eye-catching experience. So here are some of our breeding birds. And I'm starting with the golden-cheeked warbler, and the only reason I'm doing that, even though it doesn't breed in your area, I'm starting with it because this is a really iconic bird in the state of Texas. It's a controversial bird for a lot of landowners in the Edwards Plateau. It's a bird that has very specific requirements. The only place in the world that this bird breeds is in a narrow band, if you will, kind of a comma-shaped band of the Edwards Plateau. If that habitat disappears, this bird is extinct. It has not. It is very specific. It uses the bark of mature ash juniper trees to build its nest, and for whatever reason, that's what it's adapted to. It is not adapted to anything else. So very, very restricted based on where the ash juniper trees grow in Texas. So they are true Texas native, I guess is what I would like to emphasize there. But they have already arrived here in our part of the world. They're going to depart by early August for sure, but a lot of them don't. Again, they'll be gone by early to mid-July in many cases. Again, as typical with the warblers, they will sit on exposed perches and sing. You can see this male has its mouth wide open. The females arrive later. And again, it's restricted to the Edwards Plateau. So I put that out there because it is a federally endangered species. It's unique to Texas, and which I think just frankly makes it pretty special. One bird that, if we get into our breeding birds that are in your area in Bastrop County, we can start with this guy right here, the yellow-throated warbler. I'm going to say this more than once this afternoon, but what a magnificent bird. I mean, honest to goodness, that is some color. This is the male. You can see the one is singing. They arrive in early March to mid-May. They're already in our area, and I would bet if you went to a floodplain type area or river or stream with large tall trees like cypress trees, you would probably already hear them singing in locations in Bastrop County. They sing very quickly upon arrival. They are kind of a rare migrant in the eastern third of the plateau there, but in your area, the farther east you go from the plateau, the I-35 corridor, if you will, the more common they become. But they are very much a floodplain type of bird. So you're going to hear them in riparian areas. So listen for them around where you live. You might be surprised to know that they are there. And I would guess maybe even Bastrop State Park may have them breeding in that location as well. But they nest high in the trees. They spend most of their time high in the trees, but a very distinctive song that they have, and a very beautiful bird. So again, this is one that you're going to find in your area. Another one that's going to be in riparian areas is the northern parula. You can see the beautiful colors of the male here on the upper left. This is a younger male right here. Notice this one has eye arcs. So in terms of identifying, in fact, let's go back one. Let's go back to this guy. If you're going to identify a yellow-throated warbler, this is the warbler with a yellow throat, and then you've got the black mask on the eyes and on the cheek. That's all you need to see to identify this bird. Now, it does have the black barring, but a lot of other birds do. But you're not going to see another warbler with just that throat and the upper chest being that bright yellow. So again, that's where it gets its name. The northern parula, it's going to have a couple wing bars. It's going to have the eye arcs that you see right there in both the male and adult male and the younger bird. It also has a little green patch in the back. It looks like a green triangle. A very blue head. The mandible, the bill is yellow on the bottom, kind of dark on the top. This has an ascending call down in riparian areas among the cypress trees. It arrives by mid-March, so I'm guessing it's already in your area as well and should already be singing. But a really beautiful song on this particular bird. In fact, I tell you what I'll do. I'll very quickly pull up an app. I have an app, by the way, known as iBird Pro. I think somebody said the other day it costs $9.99, but you can type in any bird in the world and pull up things. So if I pull up Parula very quickly, I want you to hear this song because it's really quite a lovely song it has. Let's see here. Let's do this one. I don't know. Hopefully you can hear that. But if you can't hear it, it's an ascending rapid chipping call. The reason I'm going to play that because we're going to come up to another breeding bird that's real common in your area because you've got the pine trees over there that has a very similar song. So we want to listen for both of those. Another bird that nests in your area is the black and white warbler. And again, here, what a great name for a bird, huh? It's black and white striped bird. This is the male. It has more black and white stripes than the female. Again, they have already arrived. They're going to be passing through some parts of Texas, but they're nesting where I live. They're nesting where you live. They have a very dramatic seesaw, seesaw, seesaw song that is very distinctive. You can ignore the thing about the golden cheek warbler, but they do hang around with golden cheek warblers. But they also nest in riparian areas and also in upland areas. So it's a bird that you should be watching for. This is the bark gleaner. This is the one that's going to be going down the bark, around the bark, up the bark, around twigs, around branches, as it's hunting for insects. So very distinctive behaviors, very distinctive look. And if black and white can be beautiful, there you go right there. Nice pattern of that. Another bird of riparian areas is the Louisiana water thrush. Now, for all the world, this could be a sparrow to a lot of people. It's a little brown bird with stripes. However, has a longish, skinny, thin bill, has very long legs for a warbler, and that's because it's on the ground running around. A lot of times our birds that spend a lot of their time on the ground have longish legs, or longish feet, I should say. But this bird has brown back. It has the brownish streaking on kind of a off yellow pattern right there that you see. It's already arrived. It has a very loud, distinct song along riparian areas. It nests down at the base of trees, so it's a ground nesting bird. And it's one that is wagging its tail or bobbing its tail as it hunts. And it will literally right along the stream banks, on the rocks, on the banks, looking at dead logs, looking for insects and other things to eat. There's another relative of it that I want to show you that is also known as the northern water thrush. You can see those birds are pretty darn similar. Can be a real challenge to identify. The lower photograph shows them both together. The one on the right on the lower photograph is the Louisiana water thrush. And what a lot of birders, expert birders will say is, look at the throat. The throat is clean on the Louisiana. It's got more pattern on the throat of the northern water thrush. The other thing, that white line that goes above the eye called a supercilium actually extends well beyond the back of the eye on the northern water thrush by comparison to the Louisiana. But again, when you only see one of them, it's a little challenging. It's okay if you don't know exactly. A good clue as to which bird is which is the Louisiana water thrush prefers moving water, habitats with moving water, whereas the northern water thrush is often around ponds or marshes, places where the water is still. And of course, there's variation to that. But that's a general characteristic to help you separate those two. Another bird that is absolutely gorgeous, look at that thing. The prothonotary warbler, you can see the white in the tail there. It's a dramatic yellow bordering on orange. Almost looks like the sun's just grabbed a piece of the sun. But the big black eye with the black eye ring makes that eye look huge. The dark black bill, very, very striking. Notice this one doesn't have any wing bars. This is a bird that is a cavity nesting bird. It doesn't make its cavity like a woodpecker, but it uses cavities, old woodpecker holes or rotted out wood to nest like an eastern bluebird would, for example. In fact, you can put up nest boxes for prothonotary warblers. They're very much a bird of the of wetland areas. So that's gonna be their preferred. So it could be along lake edges, it could be along marshes, that kind of place. So they are known to breed in very local areas of Bastrop County. So certainly a bird to keep an eye open for this spring. A very, very striking bird. Another bird that is out of the riparian areas is the pine warbler. This is a bird that, as the name would imply, lives in and nests in pine trees. So this is a bird that's going to be around year-round where you live in the Lost Pines area. Has a very much a song like a chipping sparrow, if you ever heard that, a high staccato, chip, 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 real loud, goes on for several more seconds than the parula does. And instead of being ascending, it's more of a flat call. So it's a rapid chipping, but it's like this instead of going like that in terms of the call. But you'll notice it has what almost look like eye arcs, yellow eye arcs on it, two very distinct white wing bars, but overall a yellow body with kind of that greenish wash. Really, really neat bird. This is a bird that is very, very associated with pine forests in East Texas, again, in the Bastrop area. On rare occasion in the winter, it'll get this far to the east. We'll cross I-35 and end up at somebody's bird feeder eating suet or something like that. But again, you're very fortunate to have this beautiful looking little yellow bird in your area. Some other breeders that you could have in your area that also have a lot of yellow. The common yellowthroat, if we start at the top right, notice I call it the bandit bird because it has that black mask across the eye with that little whitish wash above. It's a bird of marshy areas, cattails, bulrushes, places like that. And it may breed in your area. It breeds in spotty locations throughout much of Texas. It's going to be more common as a breeder to your east and north, but it's not impossible that it could breed in the Bastrop area around aquatic environments. Then you have the Kentucky warbler, which is another bird that is going to breed in small areas within Bastrop County, kind of isolated, more to the north and the east again, but you should watch for the Kentucky warbler. And then the other one that just one of my favorite warblers of all time, who couldn't like a bird that looks like that? That's the male with that hood, black hood with the yellow face, very, very distinctive. The hooded warbler is a bird also of riparian areas, and that bird may actually nest in Bastrop County as well. In fact, there are records in Bastrop County. So again, that's a bird to watch for. These, as you can see, these are all, they've got lots of variation of black and yellow on them, but they're distinct enough. I mean, the hooded warbler, you're not going to confuse with any other warbler that's out there. Likewise, I really don't think you could confuse the common yellowthroat either, just because it has that black mask. Kentucky warbler, yeah, there's a few other birds that look a little bit like it. So now we've been showing you a lot of very colorful birds here that breed in your area. They're warblers. I want to show you this one too. This is the Swainson's warbler. There are some warblers that are more dull brown colored. This has that distinct whitish supercilium above the eye. It has not really any other colors. It's just brown, long feet. It spends a lot of its time on the ground. This is a bird that can locally breed in the right areas of Bastrop County, mostly to the east and the north again, where it prefers floodplain type areas where it's densely brushy, but again, a bird to watch for as a breeding bird in your area. There's a lot here, isn't there? For sure. So some overwintering, this list gets fairly small. It's fairly small, fortunately. We have the yellow rump warbler, also known as the butterbutt. It's called the butterbutt because it has a yellow rump patch right there. It's bright yellow. So when it opens its wings, you can't miss that. This is one that would be a typical wintering, probably a female bird. This one over here is becoming a male, where you can actually see some of the gray starting to come into the head, some of the black, some of that bright yellow on the top of the head and on the flanks right there. So that's a bird that's transitioning from its winter plumage to its spring plumage. And then in our area, we can have two different types of yellow rump warblers. They used to be their own species, but the Audubon's has a yellow throat, whereas the myrtle has a white throat. Most of the birds you're going to see are going to be the myrtle variety with the white throat, but already this spring, I've seen a couple of the Audubon's here in Bernie, so it's not impossible that you could see those. And then another bird that's actually probably the easiest way to identify this guy is because it really doesn't have anything to help you identify it by. Its plainness is its identification marker. This is the orange-crowned warbler. It does have an orange crown, usually hidden by other head feathers. So in order to tell male from female, you have to have it in the hand. You got to measure the amount of orange from the front to the back and determine whether it's male or female. So most of the time that orange is hidden. But you'll notice it has no wing bars. It does have a faintish eye ring or eye arcs almost. This one looks more like eye arcs. Looks like a hint of a line through the eye, but not real distinctive. This one looks like it almost has a little bit of barring on the chest, but again, very pale, very unobtrusive. So if you see a very plain, thin-billed little bird in the wintertime coming to your suet or your water, it may very well be the orange-crowned warbler, which is one of our common overwintering birds. So from there, we're going to go to spring migrants. These are the birds that are going to be passing through probably starting within the next few weeks. Well, let's see, we're almost the end of April. So I would say anytime now we'll start to see these birds, and you're going to see them into about mid-May, and then we won't see them again until fall. And they're, again, not as brightly colored, not as obvious to us in the fall. So the spring migrants, some that are brightly yellow that we have are the yellowish, most yellow one is the yellow warbler, aptly named. This is an adult after second year male. Notice, by the way, a lot of my photographs have come from a good friend of mine, John Prentice. I've tried to give him a photo credit on all of those, and some of these others come from photographs that I was able to use off of iNaturalist. And then others were like this Wilson's warbler were in my hand because I'm a licensed bird bander. So I was fortunate enough to hold some of these guys. But the yellow warbler, the adult after second year male, is going to have these very distinct red lines running right down their chest. Otherwise, they're a bright yellow warbler, very, very common migrant throughout most of Texas. Probably one of the most common migrants, I think, at least in my encounters out there and when I'm out bird watching in the spring. The Wilson's warbler is a smaller warbler than the yellow. They're all small, but the Wilson's is a little bit smaller. You notice it has a yellow eye ring, but that's not what we're looking for. What we're looking for is that little black patch on top of the head that indicates a Wilson's warbler. Does not have any wing bars. It's yellow, but it's got that little tiny black patch right on top of the head, like a little toupee, if you will. And it is a bird that is actually, unlike the yellow, which is often higher in the mid to upper parts of the tree, the Wilson's warbler is actually closer to the ground. So it's going to be foraging in the shrubs. It'll forage up high too, but a lot of times where you find it is going to be in the shrubbery. And it's a fairly common migrant, actually. And if you live down in the valley, you might actually see some of those through the winter time. Now, here's some spring migrants with a lot of yellow. But you also notice they have hoods. They're wearing gray to black hoods. We have 3 of them that are possibilities. One of them is almost an impossibility, and that's the Connecticut warbler. Very, very, very rare in Texas. It's more of an eastern bird, but there are a few records of the Connecticut warbler here in Texas. I have one that I saw at Guadalupe River State Park one day. I'll go to my grave knowing that's what I saw because I could see that it had a gray hood, and it had a full gray hood. When I say a gray hood, it's covering the entire head all the way down onto the chest. And that's a distinction between another bird I'm going to show you in the next slide. But these 3 have the black hoods, but the big difference here is looking at the eye. The Connecticut warbler has a complete white eye ring. The McGivrays, which is a western species that I've already mentioned, has eye arcs, one a little white on top, a little white on bottom. And then the mourning warbler, the other bird that of these 3 that you're mostly likely going to encounter in Bastrop County, is going to be the mourning warbler. It lacks any white around the eye. This is a bird also, if you're going to when you start finding Wilson's warblers, start watching for mourning warblers because they like to hunt in the same low shrubs and bushes. So oftentimes you'll find them near each other or in the same area anyway. But these are the complete dark hoods of the warbler world. Now, if we compare this bird right here, which is one of our most common migrants, the Nashville warbler, it has gray on the head. It has a white eye ring that looks a lot like this, but notice it's a little hard to tell here, but it has a yellow throat, whereas this one has the dark throat. This bird is going to be much more common than the Connecticut warbler. In fact, of all the warblers, in terms of commonality in spring migration, once the yellow rumps and the orange crowns are out of here, it's going to be the Nashville warbler and the yellow warbler, at least in my experience watching warblers through this part of the country. But a very common spring migrant, you're going to see a lot of them. Another bird that has gray on the head, but not a hood at all, but is another migrant that you're going to see probably more of in your neck of the woods than I am over here, which is only, I don't know, 75 miles away. And yet it changes so dramatically. This bird has gray here, but notice it has a black line through the eye. And instead of a solid eye ring, it has eye arcs. So it has white above the eye, white below the eye, split by that black bar. And the gray is only on the top of the head and on the back of the head, doesn't wrap around the face like it does on the Nashville warbler. Whoops. I don't know what just happened there. Okay, there we go. Well, yeah, I do. The camera fell. Anyway, hit the desk too hard, I guess. But this is another bird that can be a very common migrant through our area. And then two that you're going to be lucky to see anytime are the blue-winged warbler and the golden-winged warbler, two separate species that interbreed, and they have their own names for those interbreeding pairs. But the blue-winged warbler has all yellow with white wing bars, but it has the black line between the eye and the bill, whereas the golden-winged warbler obviously has gold on the wing, gold cap, black throat, black through the eye, very distinctive, very beautiful bird. Of the two, you probably have the best chance of seeing the golden-winged warbler. And another common warbler with black and yellow contrast, we're going to look at three. This is probably of the three going to be the most common, is the black-throated green. And it gets its name because it's a green warbler with an obvious black throat. And it's a very common, a lot of people in our neck of the woods will confuse this with the golden-cheeked warbler, but the golden cheek has black on the top of the head, not that greenish color that you're seeing there. Two others that can come through of the two, the magnolia or Maggie is going to be a lot more common. Very distinctive eye arcs, black mask through the face, and then the yellow from the base of the bill all the way down through to the rump with those black lines, stripes with a lot of white in the wing. Very beautiful bird. The Canada warbler, far less common migratory bird. Notice it has a very distinct white eye ring, and then it has a black bib underneath the throat. That's very distinctive of that little warbler. Two that are farther to the east, and I'll just very briefly touch on these. These are tail pumpers. Both of these birds pump their tail up and down when they're foraging. The prairie warbler and the palm warbler, two very distinctive, but very, now we're getting into some pretty uncommon birds there. And then finally, we've got about five left to look at here. The American redstart is a great bird. You're going to see those. Anytime you see a black bird with fire orange wings, that's going to be the American redstart. Really, really, really quite beautiful. And then the blackpoll looks a lot like a black and white. Jared Haney, I think your microphone is on. I don't know if I can mute him. Yeah, I did. There we go. Thanks, Jared. Blackpoll warbler has got that black cap and black along the edge of the face, but not covering the throat. Of these three birds, this is going to be very uncommon, as is the bay-breasted, which, what a beautiful bird, right? It's going to be very uncommon through our area as well. Again, these birds are mostly to the east, but they come into Texas along the Gulf Coast and then spread out from there. And then finally, two very distinctive birds that are very different looking in their own right is a chestnut-sided warbler that has that chestnut streak on the side of the upper chest with the yellow on the cap. Very beautiful bird in its own right. And then the Blackburnian, which looks like its face is on fire. Its head is on fire when you see it up in the tree. So distinctive. No other warbler. I can't even think of another bird that has that kind of orange just on the head and the chest. We're going to show you orioles in a moment, but that is a really distinctive bird. Both of them are certainly possible through our area and your area as well. And then lastly, we have the ovenbird and the worm-eating warbler. This bird is going to be more to the east of you. Very drab bird, but except for the stripes on the head. This guy's kind of a brownish bird too, but a white eye ring. It has streaks on the top of the head, similar in color like this, but in different widths. And then, of course, it also has spots on the chest and the belly to make it distinctive. But both of these birds can migrate through our area. And these are ground-loving migratory birds too. So oftentimes they're going to be close to or on the ground when you see them. So that's the warblers. That's a lot of information, I know. And it's probably a little overwhelming. I don't know if y'all are recording this, but if you didn't, I think you are recording it, so you can see it later. The other thing is I can send a PDF out to Roxanne that you can have that as well to kind of review if you want to. But I'll let Roxanne decide on that. So now what I want to do, so those are the warblers. That's a lot of birds. That's a big, I mean, I've spent certain programs only talking warblers, but I thought because it's spring migration and the timing of the year and the fact that it's just getting beautiful out, if not a little hot, it's a little hazy here today because we've got fires to our north and our east or west. That's making the sky look very, very hazy, unfortunately, due to the dry weather. So I want to talk about a few of the other migratory birds that you have in your area that you should be on the watch for. These are called vireos, and vireos, you know, when you start looking at them, you go, well, they kind of look like warblers. But I want to go back one slide, and you'll notice these guys have very thin bills, relatively thin bills. And when we go to the vireos, their bills are a little shorter, just a little thicker. But the thing that separates them is the tip of the upper mandible actually goes beyond the tip of the lower mandible. So it's kind of like this. Let's see if I can get this to show, kind of like this. And so that little bit of thickening of the bill tip being extending a little bit, and other behaviors that they have will separate the vireos from the warblers. But a lot of people, when we think warblers, we think vireos as well, because they have distinct patterns. The most common one that you might encounter is the white-eyed vireo. It gives its, by looking at the eye, you get the name of the bird, white-eyed vireo. Very distinctive pattern with that white eye. The young birds don't have that, but the adults do. Then we have, as a contrast, we have the red-eyed vireo. I wish that red eye would show up, but it doesn't in this particular picture. But notice it has two black streaks there, one above the eye, one through the eye. It does have a red eye. It's got gray on top of the head. This bird is going to look a lot like, if you recall, the Tennessee warbler. But again, it's going to have a slightly thicker bill with that tip extending. The other thing about vireos that is different from warblers is if you have, let's just go from frenetic behavior to slower behavior. You have the kinglets, which are just constantly moving like this all over looking for food. And you have the warblers that are doing this. They're a little bit slower. And then you have the vireos that come and land, look around, do this, go over here, look around, go over here. So they are much more methodical, I guess is a good word to use, in terms of their movement through the trees, which helps you kind of identify those small birds that they might actually be vireos. And so we have the red-eyed, the white-eyed, the blue-headed vireo. This is a nesting bird. Now it's a nesting bird in this photograph. This was photographed in New York by my friend John Prentice. But this is a migratory bird and occasionally a winter bird. So you might actually see this guy, and he's got like a bluish gray head. Notice the big eye ring that almost look like spectacles, because that white connects the eye to the base of the bill. And that's very common with the blue-headed vireo. And then so that's white there, whereas you have the yellow-throated vireo, which has yellow down the throat. It also has a big yellow eye ring that is connected to the bill by a yellowish stripe too. So two very similar looking birds, but one's yellow, one's not. So that separates the yellow-throated vireo from the blue-headed vireo. And then we have flycatchers. These are going to be, we're getting out of the woods now into more open areas. The scissor-tail flycatcher, I know you're all familiar with. It's a migratory bird. They should be coming back anytime here in the next couple of weeks. We have the eastern phoebe, which in some areas is a winter bird. Sometimes a big snowstorm we had a year ago really put the hurt on local populations of eastern phoebes, but I think they're coming back. They use moss to make their nest in the similar places where you see barn swallows nesting. The great crested flycatcher is one of our most common flycatchers. Yellow belly, gray through the chest and up into the face, and then a brown cap, and beautiful rufous colored color in the wings and especially in the tail. That's a secondary cavity nesting bird, famous for using snake skins in their nest. This particular one, it usually uses old woodpecker holes. This one was actually using a martin house that wasn't being used by martins, and raised a clutch of young there. And then you have this whole group of flycatchers known as empodonax or emps. They all look alike. They all come through your area. Two white wing bars, white eye ring of some kind or another, and that's it. And trying to identify them, the only way to identify them positively is if you hear them call or hear them sing, and it's usually a call. And they usually don't do that. So they can be really frustrating. Some of the flycatchers can be. We also have flycatchers known as kingbirds. Both of these are in your area. The eastern kingbird is a migrant through our area. It nests farther north in the state of Texas. The western kingbird nests out towards your area, and they actually are now nesting a lot of times around Valero station, gas stations and places like that that have tall lights at night. They've really adapted to our building structures and light poles and things like that. Notice the eastern kingbird has got that solid, beautiful black head. with black all the way down the back. It has white tips to the tail feathers, which are very distinctive of this bird. And then this guy has white, but the white is on the outer edge of the outermost tail feathers. So when it flies, you'll see that little white edge there. And again, has more of the, looks a little bit more like the great crested flycatcher, but notice it has gray on the top of the head and no brown there. And plus the great crested is going to be more of a woodland edge bird, where the western kingbird is going to be more of an open country bird, just like the eastern kingbird, which is a really kind of a prairie bird, if you will. And then we have a series of thrushes. We have 2 of them that migrate through our area. The wood thrush has one of the most beautiful songs ever. If you get a chance, play it sounds like a flute. But they have a very, very rich brown from the base of the bill over the back of the head, all the way down to the tail. You have and then these roundish spots that are very, very distinctive, and a nice eye ring. They all have an eye ring. The Swainson's thrush is another migratory of the 2 birds. This is going to be the more common one coming through our area. The wood thrush is more of an eastern bird. The Swainson's thrush has a little bit wider range, but it usually has a little bit of yellowish color in the side of the face and in the upper part of the throat here. And the distinct spotting is not quite, it's more muted on the flanks, where it's more distinct on the wood thrush. And then in the winter time, and I'm throwing this in here because they still may be in your area, is the hooded, is the hermit thrush. It's got a brown back, but then it gets down to the rump and the tail and is brilliant rufous colored, very muted coloration on the chest, very common only in the wintertime, and then it moves north for the spring season. So that is a bird that actually will hang out in the wintertime. A couple of birds that aren't really related, but I wanted to throw them on there because they're such cool looking birds. One is the yellow-billed cuckoo, and it's a bird that will be returning sometime by May. We should have in our area. And notice it's a yellow-billed cuckoo because the lower mandible is yellow. We also have black-billed cuckoos, but they're very rare. But their bill is all dark. Their tail feather pattern is a little bit different. These have very long tail feathers. A really, really neat bird. They love eating I should say love. They eat large, hairy caterpillars specifically. And then we have the gray catbird, which is a mimic thrush related to the mockingbird and the brown thrasher. This little gray bird, all dark with a black top knot, it's an underbrush kind of bird. So it's one that can pass by, but it has a very distinctive call that it makes all the way through migration. It sounds like a meowing cat. So very, very distinct. Again, deep in the brush, you can see a dark gray bird. It's gonna be hard to see in deep brush, but really a neat bird to watch for as it passes through your area in migration. And then we have the more colorful birds that are not warblers. We have the tanagers, we have the scarlet, which is probably less common in terms of a migrant, but certainly can come through your area. Brilliant red, this is kind of washed out orange on this one, but brilliant red with those black wings and tail, very, very distinctive. Migratory through our area, a northern breeder. And then breeding in our state is the summer tanager. Looks cardinal-like, but notice the bill is more yellow and it's not as fat, not as deep or thick as the cardinal is, but a very common breeding bird, as is the painted bunting. And most of you are, I'm sure, familiar with painted bunting. What a striking bird. And then it has its little cousin, the indigo bunting, also migrates through the state. But has that distinct deep, deep blue on the head and then blue throughout the entire body, the males. The females of both of those are more brown, although the painted bunting's female has kind of a greenish iridescence through the body. And then another blue bird is the blue grosbeak. Some people will confuse these two. This is a much larger bird. Also notice the bill is much more massive, gross meaning large, so massive beak. A little bit thinner bill right here, even though it's wide at the base, it thins down. This one's just a big old chunker of a bill. And it also has brown in the wings, and that helps distinguish that from the indigo bunting. And its cousin that migrates through our area is the rose-breasted grosbeak. Again, massive bill. This one was eating a mulberry. And that red is not from the mulberry. It has red on the chest, the males do, solid black head, black back with the white wing bar. Really striking birds. So I wanted to share those with you as well. And then of course, we can't forget the orioles, simply because, hey, they're pretty brightly colored too in your area. The orchard oriole is going to be nesting in your area. Notice it's more kind of a burnt orange with that black hood, very distinctive. It does make a basket-like nest. like the Baltimore Oriole, except the Baltimore tends to be about this deep, and the Orchard Oriole is about this deep, and they build them on the edges of small trees, usually in old fields that have small trees, kind of brushy areas. That's where you typically find the Orchard Oriole, and it nests all the way across the state, almost virtually. So this is a bird that is more common than a lot of people realize. The Baltimore Oriole, obviously very striking bird, has gone through different name changes, now split between the Bullocks and the Baltimore, but very beautiful bird in its own right. Both of these being the males, by the way, the females being more muted. But the Baltimore is going to be one that goes farther to the north of where y'all are. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. Looks like we're doing time-wise, we're doing okay, I believe. Here's some references that you might want to check out if you want to learn more about warblers, some really good references there. The Peterson Field Guide is more of a very intense identification book. I don't happen to have it, well, I do somewhere. But the Warbler Guide is relatively new. It has lots of good identification information, probably overwhelming to some degree. Donald and Lillian Stokes' book is a lot thinner. If I can, there you can see how thick that is versus the Warbler Guide. So this one might be a little easier to take in some ways. And then of course, some books on Texas birds. And then the last book I wanted to put in there is called North on the Wing. It's a relatively new book, but it tracks migration, spring migration of songbirds. And it talks a lot about warblers. This gentleman actually, he tracked them from, I think, from the Rio Grande Valley all the way to their northern breeding grounds. And really a great read, a very enjoyable read. You learn a ton of information about bird migration and the behaviors of these birds and what people are doing to help conserve these birds as well. So definitely check out some of those books. And I do want to thank John Prentice. He's a Texas master naturalist. He's a good buddy. He's gone through some big health issues and he is coming out the other end. So I'm very thankful for that, so we can get out and go birding again. But he provided a lot of those photographs, so I really appreciate that. And then finally, the last thing I want to mention is that because I have to, I need to, is the City Nature Challenge coming up on Friday, April 29th through Monday, May 2nd this year. Is the City Nature Challenge. Bastrop County is within the Austin area that is participating in that. And basically what this is, it is an event, 4-day event to encourage people to get out with iNaturalist, take pictures of everything you see. And it's kind of a friendly competition. I think there are over 400 cities worldwide that are participating, including quite a few in Texas. It's using, of course, the iNaturalist app to do this. And there's all of the areas that are participating this year. It's the most we've ever had. So a lot of people are participating. Dallas and Houston areas, Dallas-Fort Worth, Houston areas are always in the top 5 to 10 city metropolitan areas, I'll call it, globally in terms of the outcome of this. Austin does very well as well. San Antonio, where I live, we're trying to capture every county apparently in Central Texas to give us a better chance. But it's a lot of fun. There's also a 7-day period after that, 6-day period after that, where people get on to iNaturalist and help people identify what they've actually seen, because all of those identifications count and matter for the City Nature Challenge, but then also for us, because we'll look at the results of those and see if there are any SGCN that were photographed or recorded by sound within the City Nature Challenge. And here's the web page for the City Nature Challenge Austin. You can see again, here's the coverage area. You go basically from Burnett all the way to Bastrop and a little bit farther to the east there. So I encourage you to get out, check out iNaturalist. It's a great way to learn about the nature in your backyard or wherever you are. And with that, I will say thank you. And if there are questions, I'll stop sharing my screen here. If there are questions, I'm happy to answer those and then let you all get on with dinner.
Thank you, Craig. That was very interesting. I have seen some comments, or rather questions in the chat. If anyone would like to, for example, Shondi, Janet, I know at least those two had questions. You can unmute and ask your question if you would like.
I don't think I had any specific questions. I'll go look go back and look, but I was just commenting on the birds and the things he was saying.
Okay.
I did see one question that said, which flycatcher likes to use snakeskin in their nest? It's the great crested, Janet, great crested flycatcher. Although what I find is the more I see bird nests, the more it's amazing how many of them use either pieces of plastic or snakeskin in their nest. The thought was that the flycatcher uses it to kind of ward off other potential predators, but I don't know. It's nice soft material, so it may just be for nest lining.
I have just one observation on the Eastern Phoebe.
Yes.
We don't use our front porch.
Okay.
And we allow the barn swallows to use the front porch.
Okay.
And probably 3 years ago, we had an Eastern Phoebe move in, build the mossy nest within the barn swallow nest.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, that happens.
Yeah.
I've seen that happen.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's pretty interesting.
Yep, they do. They will, because it forms a pretty good base for them. So they'll take advantage of that. I've seen one that happen underneath a bridge in town along a walking trail here, where the barn swallows nested and then the phoebes took over. So, yep. And a phoebe nest, you can always tell the difference because the phoebe nest is using mostly moss, and they'll nest multiple times. That's the other cool thing about that bird. And of course, they're a flycatcher, so they're a very helpful bird to have around our homes.
Right.
And they seem to be starting to recover. They really got hammered last February. Here at the Nature Center where my office is, they virtually disappeared for the entire breeding season. It was only in late summer, early spring that I finally started hearing them again. So, but they tried to make it through the winter, and that storm devastated them like bluebirds and other things that stayed.
All right, this is an in the moment. Wow. I just looked out the window of my office, which is where I would see the Eastern Phoebe nesting in the old barn swallow nest. And I'm looking out now and I see a barn swallow sitting in the moss that the Eastern Phoebe built.
Well, it's very possible if you start seeing mud on top of the Eastern Phoebe nest.
That's fabulous.
It may go right back, and they must like that area. So those birds nest in very similar locations. So that's cool. Yeah, the barn swallows showed up. I started seeing them last week for the first time. So them and the cliff swallows are back now too. So migration is picking up steam, and more things are going to be getting seen here over the course of the next 3 or 4 weeks. So it's a great time to get out and see all of these birds that we've talked about today, along with everything else. So
yeah, very cool. Thank you.
So I had a question. Is there a way to successfully, I've read some things online, but what have other people done to successfully prevent wasp nests from getting into their nesting houses? I've had this happen the last couple of years, and
yeah,
I've even had birds actually nest up to even getting eggs in there, and then the wasps come in, and then that's it.
So my wife does some nest box monitoring here at the Nature Center and in Bernie, and she what they use is petroleum jelly, that that green jelly like stuff you can buy at HEB or wherever, and smear it on the top of the nest box lid, on the inside of the nest box lid, and then down about 2 or 3 inches on the top. Don't do it all the way down, because then that can get into the feathers of the baby birds. But that might be able, that apparently works pretty good to discourage a lot of the red wasps from nesting in there. But you gotta get on it. You may have to do it more than once a season to keep them out.
The other thing that I have tried is bar soap, scraping it on the top. Do you know how effective that is?
I haven't heard that, but that wouldn't be surprised to try it. I mean, anything like that would be not too toxic, and And it could work. It absolutely could work. It may just make
Actually,
the surface slippery.
I read
enough.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I read that
we've
online.
we've used that and we've recommended that in the LPHCP. I mean, it's
Oh,
not
good.
going to be 100% foolproof, but using a bar soap, you got to get a decent, layer on there so it's got that waxy kind of film on it. But there is success with
sense.
that.
Yeah,
Good.
Bluebird Society recommends using something like ivory bar soap.
Yep.
You can
Yeah.
use
I
a
agree.
thick wash or wipe it on there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Thank you.
then the mama bird can wash out the baby bird's mouth if they say something. Every time I hear ivory soap, I think of my mother when I was a child and sitting in a bathroom sucking on some ivory soap if I said the wrong thing. Ugh. To this day, I can't stand the smell of that soap. But it's not very toxic. I can say that.
I had to turn off my microphone because I was laughing too hard.
Yes. Childhood memories. So
I have a question.
sure.
So I've been getting a lot of questions. Sorry if the music's too loud in the background. I've been getting a lot of questions from our members about bluebirds not seeming to be around as much this year. And you just said that, last February probably had an effect, but I was down in the Houston area, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, and they were all over the place down there.
Oh, interesting.
So do you think that maybe they're later to arrive in Bastrop, or
Well,
that maybe they're staying away from this area because of the freeze, or?
I'm guessing. So here's what I'm guessing. And this is a little bit of conjecture based on my experience here in the Bernie area. We lost a lot of bluebirds last year due to the storm, and they were lost all over the state. The Houston area, I don't know if it was as severe, so maybe there was better survival. Plus, being along the coast there might have been more insect food or fruit from fruit trees that was able to be used as a food supply. But here, we, after that storm, for weeks after that storm, I hardly ever saw or heard a bluebird. We now have a few pairs back in the nature center area where they're nesting in the grasslands, but still not the number that I'm used to seeing prior to that. So in May, if the Bastrop area lost a fair number of birds, it could take a couple of seasons before the numbers come back. So if you had, let's say you had 2 pairs on your property and you lost both those pairs, and there were pairs lost all over the place, it just may take time for them to come back and repopulate the area. That wouldn't surprise me at all. If that's, I think it'll be interesting. Bluebird nest box data between before the storm and then compare it to the year of the storm, and this year in particular will be real interesting to see if you start to see a recovery. But it could take 2 to 3, 4 years to recovery, depending on the losses that were. And of course, with most songbirds that died during that storm, we'll never know how many died because they're small, and unless they froze to death in your nest box where they were roosting those nights, we'll never know for sure. But my general impression with bluebirds, phoebes, and northern mockingbirds is that they took a huge hit with this storm. And I'm thinking that we'll start to see recovery this year, and then it may be next year before you really start to notice significant. And that's if they have a successful nest season this year. So
yeah,
I hope that helps, Jared.
Yeah, the phoebes and mockingbirds seem to be readily abundant, but yeah,
Good.
and I figure the bluebirds, I mean, maybe later in the season they'll start to show up a little bit more, but we'll see how the season progresses. Yeah,
I think it just takes time for these birds to recover from those kind of localized events. And there are migratory bluebirds, but a lot of ours that nest here not all of them, but a lot of them try to stay in the area. And of course, the whole state was affected last year too. It wasn't, if it was just Bastrop to Bernie and that was it, we wouldn't probably see the dramatic loss. But because it was a statewide event, that's probably what had an impact all over the place. So it's just going to take time for them to recover, but I'm sure they will recover. They're one of the more, they show, look what we've done by putting out nest boxes since the 20s. I mean, the recovery's been spectacular, and they will recover again. So.
My question I did have earlier was, can this presentation be emailed to us? It had so much great facts in it.
Yeah, Roxanne, how are you going to handle that? I guess as
It has been recorded and I will share that. And Craig, if you are generous enough to share a PDF with me, I would
Sure.
be happy to share that with the membership as well.
Okay, yeah, I can do that. I'll do that next week, early next week. I'll get out a PDF of this.
Great,
Perfect.
thank you.
Thank you.
You betcha.
Any other questions? I guess not.
All right.
Craig, thank you very much for educating and entertaining us once again. And I know I personally look forward to having you back for some upcoming program in the next couple of years.
Well, I want to come back. I want to come back sometime when you're all doing field research on those darn toads. I want to see one of these things. So
You've never seen a
Houston toad. No, never have. So I've never been that fortunate, but I'd sure like to. So that would be a real cool experience. We could come over and do a presentation, then go out and do a bio blitz or something and go hunt them. I'd be all for that.
Okay, well, we'll see if we can make that happen. That sounds fun, Craig.
I'm serious. I'm completely serious.
I was just going to say, Carrie, I hope you're listening because, you know, I'm going to be calling you.
It would be pretty, it's funny. We were just talking about with my team, how cool it would be if we did some type of a video. I mean, I said, oh, we could do something live when they're out there calling, but everybody will be asleep.
Oh, hey, I tell you what, wait a minute though. I tell you what, when we get, well, we haven't had rain forever, but when we get a big 3 or 4 inch rain here in Bernie, the frogs come out of the ground. Yeah, they just go berserk. And I've done live Facebook things at 9:30 at night on a Saturday.
And you get a lot of people.
And I get people watching, and then it gets a lot of playback later where people watch it if they already are in bed. But
yeah, I'm thinking
no,
that's
we have a
great
blast
idea.
doing that. Yeah, no, I think
that would be, and we could do all toad identification is kind of what I'm thinking. It's
Absolutely.
like, you go out to a pond, you're hearing it all. So we just make sure we're going somewhere Houston are, and then we can identify everything.
I'd be happy to participate in something like that. I could even call do my infamous maybe, but my barred owl calls too, and call up some barred owls, get them talking to us too. So I got 2.5 years before I am off the picture. So you got 2.5 years, but I'd love to do that. I think that'd be a blast. And then, you know, we could, like I said, we could do a little bio blitz, do some mothing at night, you know, set up some lights and track moths, and there's all kinds of things.
Yeah, it almost sounds to me like our fall workshop. No, there's no chorusing in the fall. Yep. Maybe spring of next year, a workshop will be a nighttime in the dark. That would be cool.
I'm there if I'm invited.
I think
absolutely.
Yeah, I think we should work on it. I think that'd be a great idea.
Cool. Well, just keep me in the loop if you're interested. Well, I want to thank you all for putting up with me for the last hour and a half or so, or close to that. And hopefully it was a worthwhile session and you learned a few things. And mostly, just hope you get out and do some bird watching, because telling you what, especially if you're, you know, if you have properties that you're managing, you'd be surprised at the birds that come through your property. So, you know, just get out and enjoy the spring when you can.
Thank you, Craig.
All right.
I really enjoyed it.
You bet. You all take good care. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
All righty. Bye-bye. Okay. All right. Yep. My mic is on. That was very interesting. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. Our final agenda item for the afternoon is our final agenda